Asha ji, Assalamu alaikum. I'm Isha, the community manager for NIC Islamabad. Thank you all for joining us. This is part of our online leadership talk series that we're conducting at NIC. Today we have Hannia joining us. Hannia Zia is working for Google as a product manager, and she's working on the Google Payments app currently, right? Hani is a graduate of Yale, and she's done some wonderful stuff at a very young age. I would let her introduce herself in more detail, and then we can start the session. All right, over to you, Hania.
Thank you, Isha, and thank you everyone for dialing in and coming to the talk. So I'm Hania. I think I'll spend about 5-10 minutes just introducing myself, how I got into computer science, how I got into product management, and then I'll talk through product management and what it is at Google and how I think tech companies in Pakistan, both startups and big tech companies, can benefit from having more product managers. So I got interested in computer science at a young age. I did my O-levels and A-levels from Lahore. And that time we had a choice in O-levels whether we wanted to study pre-engineering track or pre-med track. So either you take computer science or you take biology. And I decided to take computer science because I saw that I knew so many women who were doctors, but I didn't know any women, or I didn't know many women who were engineers. So from that age, I decided to take computer science. I really liked the subject, so I continued it in A-levels. When I was applying to university, I remember having a conversation with my father that what subject should I study? What should I major in? And he said, oh, you know, computer science or IT is a good field these days. So when I applied to Yale University, I applied as a computer science student. And with every computer science journey, as some of you on the call might know, it's very up and down because computer science is very difficult as a field. So we would have really, really long problem sets at Yale. So sometimes just one homework would take 40 hours to complete. So the whole week you're only doing homework for computer science. And so I remember I had my first semester, I took a class and it went fine. But the second semester I took a class and I got not a grade that I was hoping for. So I was wondering, okay, is computer science right for me? Maybe it's not my forte. Sorry, hello? Oh, I think maybe there's a sound on the line. So I was doubting whether I should do computer science, but luckily at the same time I had applied for an internship at Facebook. And this internship was especially targeted to first-year students. And so I was very lucky to get in. And I spent 2 months at Facebook learning iOS development, so learning how to build iPhone apps. And so they spent the first 3 weeks just teaching us the basics of how to build an app. So we already knew the basics of coding, and now we were learning how to build an app. And then after that, we spent 5 weeks on a project. So my project at Facebook was that on the Facebook app, when you're sending someone a photo, you could then edit that photo kind of like you could add text, you could add stickers, you could draw with a stylus or like a freehand drawing. And so after that, I just had a really great summer and really great experience at Facebook, and saw in college, we were only learning the theory of computer science, but I saw the application of it for the first time in Silicon Valley at Facebook. So I was very excited, and I thought, okay, I need to power through this. I need to keep doing computer science. And you know, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And at that internship at Facebook, it was, you know, I was coming straight from Pakistan. So in my first year, I got to meet people like Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg, and even Jay-Z came to the Facebook campus. So we saw him as well. So it was a really unique experience, a very crazy experience to come from Lahore to suddenly be in Silicon Valley. So I decided to stick with computer science. But at that point, I was still thinking about engineering. However, at the same time, when I was at university, I was taking my computer science classes, but I got interested in psychology as well. And so psychology, I just took one class just out of interest, and I really liked it. So I decided to do a double major in both computer science and psychology. And so I was thinking, what is a field that can overlap the two of these? And there were some really researchy fields, so things like robotics, intelligent robotics, or even cognitive science, which is, you know, how does the brain work and how can you compare it to a computer? And then at that same time, so after my second year of university, I was lucky enough to get an internship at Microsoft. Now, this internship was a bit different than the first one, which was purely an engineering internship. In this internship, we spent 1 month on product management, 1 month on engineering, and 1 month on testing and quality assurance. And so through this internships, I got to spend the summer in Seattle. And the first month was product management, basically deciding what do we need to build, how it should look, what is the design, what is the user requirements, what is the business requirements. And that was my first ever exposure to doing product management by myself. And then we still did the engineering and we did the QA and we made sure that the product got out the door. It was at Microsoft, I was working on Azure Active Directory and we were building a password manager. So then I really liked computer science. So after my third year, I applied for an internship at Google as an associate product manager. So at Google, I went and did this internship. So now it was a full product management internship. There was no engineering aspect. And I was working directly with the engineers. And so what I worked on that summer was something called local search. And so on Google Maps or on Google Search, whenever you search for a place, let's say if you search for a restaurant or a movie theater, what we launched was a graph that could tell you how busy that restaurant is at different hours in the day. So at 9 a.m. it might not be as busy, but at 5 p.m. it's very busy, so that you can plan when is the best time to go to that restaurant. And then I added some additional features on top of it saying like, hey, right now, given the live GPS location of how many people are at that restaurant, this restaurant is busier than it usually is. And so that was a really cool experience to work as a product manager at Google. And basically we had this feature to get it launched out the door and people are using it, but also to keep adding improvements and keep thinking, how do we keep improving this feature? And so then I decided that product management is the right career for me. And I was very lucky to get a return offer from Google to start working there full time. So I graduated from Yale University with my computer science and psychology bachelor's. And I started in San Francisco. Actually, I was living in San Francisco, but working in the South Bay. So working in Silicon Valley at Google. So that was like kind of through my college years, how I went from, being interested in computer science, then trying out some engineering internships, then learning that product management is what I wanted to do. So now I'll talk a little bit about the 3 different roles that I've done at Google and the 3 different types of product management I've done. And then I'll walk you through the slide deck on product management at Google. So the first year when I was in San Francisco, I worked on something called Chrome OS. Chrome OS is Google's laptops, so Chromebooks. And so basically we built a new OS on Linux, and we were trying to improve people using these Chromebooks. So the whole point of Chromebooks is to make computing more accessible. We have Chromebooks laptops, which you can buy for just $200. So the whole point was that we don't think only very rich people who can afford to pay $500 to $1,000 for a laptop should be able to access the internet. We think even people who can't afford it should be able to have a laptop, be productive online. And so I was working on the Chromebook, and it was a really great first experience for me because I didn't know anything about operating systems. I didn't know anything about hardware. And I learned all of this on the job. And it was, I never studied it in university. So it was kind of, Google has this atmosphere of sink or swim. So it's kind of like, let me just throw you into the deep end. You can either figure things out or, you'll go down, then you'll ask for help and you'll come back up again. And so in the first week, I remember people were using all of this jargon. I didn't even know what like a kernel was. And then after 2 months, I started picking things up. And after 4 months, I was saying sentences that I know would have had made no sense to me 4 months ago. So it was a really great experience. And the project I worked on there was the Pixelbook. So we decided to build a high-end laptop. And here it made me get a little bit into some systems thinking of, especially when you think about marketing. So Chromebooks were $200 or dropping to $150. So there was kind of a race to the bottom on these laptops. And so we realized that as these laptops get cheaper and cheaper, the OEMs, so the manufacturers of these laptops, their margins are going to get smaller and smaller. So their profit is going to get smaller and smaller. And so it's great to make really cheap Chromebooks, but we should also make more expensive Chromebooks. So we wanted to launch a Chromebook that was $500, but that seemed really expensive. So then we decided to make a decision, which sounds counterintuitive, to also launch a Chromebook that was $1,000. And the point of the $1,000 Chromebook was kind of to showcase everything a Chromebook could do, kind of be the best in class Chromebook. But also you have the $1,000 Chromebook so that the $500 Chromebook looks more affordable to people. And also we changed the brand of Chromebooks, because before that, the brand of Chromebooks was just very cheap devices. And with this $1,000 laptop, we could say, no, Chromebooks are also premium devices. They're not just cheap devices. So that was a really cool experience. I got to go to China a few times and see the factory where they were actually building the Chromebook. It's the same factory that they build the Apple iPhones and the MacBooks in. So that was very cool. And I also built the stylus solution for the Chromebook. And at the time of launch, when we launched this Chromebook, which was in 2017, we had the fastest stylus solution in the market. It was 15 milliseconds, and we actually got a patent for that. So that was my first experience of launching something at Google, and it was very exciting. And then, so I was in this program where we did 1 year and one project, and then we were supposed to switch and do another project, so we would get more exposure. And so I decided to not just switch projects, but also switch countries. By then I had lived in the US for 5 years, and I was very used to the US. And I think I also understood Silicon Valley quite well. So I moved to Switzerland just because I wanted to live in Europe for a year and experience what is tech like there. And there I moved to Google Maps, and I worked on the data analysis team for Google Maps. So as you probably know, that Google Maps has a lot of data on people, where they're going, how they're driving, all of this. And it's really hard to organize that data. And you would be surprised, because Google really tries to be a data-driven company. And every time we make decisions, we try to back that up with data. But with Google Maps, just because the data was so disorganized and it was so hard to understand, user behavior, like it was really hard for the decision makers, which was the leadership and the product managers, to actually use data for their decisions. And so we had a team of data analysts who would write queries themselves. And you had to ask them, hey, I really want to know like how many women in Pakistan use the driving feature on a monthly basis. And they would say, okay, like leave me a day, I have to write this up. Like some data is in some tables, some data is in other tables, I have to join the tables. And so we spent a year just trying to improve and streamline that process, and also make way more intuitive and interactive dashboards that people could use to explore that data themselves without having to rely on a data analyst or a quantitative person. So that was a really great experience. And from a personal front, Switzerland was amazing, very beautiful, great hiking, great skiing, but a bit boring, I think. I lived in Zurich, which was a smaller town of about 600,000 people. And then towards the end of that, I was deciding whether I wanted to switch projects again or I wanted to stay on. And I got in touch with a team at Google called the Next Billion Users. So the Next Billion Users team focuses on the next billion people who are coming online, who are predominantly in emerging markets and developing countries like Pakistan. So I spoke to some people who are working in Singapore, and they had just launched a payments app in India. So it's kind of like EasyPaisa and JazzCash, but a bit different. And in India, in 2 years, they launched an app, and it was one of the first Google products that was launched first for a developing country and then for a developed country. So normally, whenever Google builds, it always launches in the US first. But this time they were saying, no, we want to focus on developing markets. So they launched it in India first. And in fact, they still have not yet launched it in the US. So I joined that team, I joined that team. Actually, one of the first people I spoke to on that team was Hannia Zia, who's now the special assistant to the Prime Minister on Digital Pakistan. So she was a big reason for me to join that team. And so basically I joined that team, and my job was to figure out, and I moved to Singapore, and my job was to figure out what is the next country that we should launch this payments app in. We've already launched in India. It's doing super well, but we want to launch in the next country. And so as I started doing research and again, learning about a whole new problem space, and I think this is the best thing about Google and being a product manager, is that each time you can just kind of, you have no prior background, no prior experience, but you jump into a problem and then you try to solve it. So basically, I started doing some research, figuring out why was India so successful? Why are so many people using this payment app? And then we realized that Google Pay, the payment app that we launched in India, is built on an infrastructure, a payment system infrastructure that is very unique to India. So it's called a real-time payment system. And other countries have a real-time payment system, but the way that the Indian system was exposed to tech companies that could plug into the system was very unique. So as I did more research, I realized that, you know, a lot of payment systems, like we even spoke to the payment system in Pakistan, they're not thinking that way. And so I ended up going to a bunch of countries like Brazil, Mexico, Thailand, Malaysia, Pakistan, even Japan, and just explaining to their finance minister, their IT minister, the head of their national bank or their state bank, why such a payment system is so great and why it will really help financial inclusion and help people move to digital payments. So that was a really great experience. And then we realized that, okay, it's not scalable to keep going and visiting these countries. So we decided to publish a white paper on payment systems, and we published it through Google, but together with the World Bank. So we published this white paper on how these payment systems should be built. And then in the meantime, we decided that the first country to launch was Singapore. So I worked with 3 banks in Singapore to integrate their systems into the Google Pay app. And we launched in Singapore in January. So I joined the team in a year, about like in July 2018 to launch in the next country. And then a year and a half later, we launched in Singapore. So that was a great success for us. And it took a lot of work. And that's basically what I'm doing right now. I'll pause there and I'll move to the presentation. Okay. So thanks so much. So thank you for listening to that. I wanted to share a little bit about my journey and the personal background of computer science and product management before I dived into product management at Google, which is a bit more, you know, general. So thank you for listening to my personal journey. So in this slide deck, I'm going to kind of walk through what is product management at Google, just define it a bit more and give you more of an insight on what product managers actually do on a day-to-day basis. So the way I think through the product manager role is that it's kind of between these three roles. So engineering, business, and design. So I think a lot of the times when people think of product managers, they think of project management, but it's so much more than that. And often, at least in my experience in Pakistan, is that product managers often focus a bit more on the business side. But at Google, there is a heavy emphasis that the product manager needs to be equally skilled on the business side, as well as the engineering side and the design side. And the reason for that is quite simple. So Google is a very engineering-driven company, and engineers often take the lead. And so basically, if you have not studied computer science, if you have not coded, then you don't earn the respect of the engineers. And why should they listen to you? And why should they listen to your decision-making? And you also need to be able to speak through design aspects with the engineers themselves. So if an engineer says, oh, I'm thinking of designing it in this way, but it will take 1 week and it will have this much latency, you can push back and say, oh, but why would it have this much latency? Did you try doing this thing? Did you try doing this thing? And so you're helping the engineer think through the design as well. And then from the design side, you need to have a good understanding of the user experience and the aesthetic part of it as well. So just a quick overview on what are the responsibilities. So product managers need to, the first and foremost is just get the right product out to the users. Now the end user can be a user, like a normal user, but it could also be a developer. At Google, we build a lot of developer tools as well. We also want you to understand technical domains. So basically, you need to get really deep into whatever it is that you're working on. So like I said, when I worked on hardware, I needed to understand hardware in order to be an effective product manager. When I got into payments, I had to understand payment systems. And you need to be an expert. You cannot just rely on the engineers to be the experts, because you need to be the one making the decision. And and you're also working at the intersection of all of these fields. So engineering, UX design, but you need to care about marketing. You need to make sure you get the legal approvals. You need to make sure that the business is growing. And number 4, which is you always need to think about the user first. Often in companies, people are optimizing for different things. Like people on the business side are optimizing for revenue. Some engineers are optimizing for building the coolest thing, or what is the most technically advanced thing that's a challenge to them. Legal's worried about covering our backs and making sure we don't have any loopholes. And marketing is let's get it into the hands of people. But you as a product manager has to think about, what does the user actually want, and are we building for that? Are we only building for our own revenue and our own bottom line? Then that's probably not a great product. And then that feeds into number 5, where there's going to be a lot of competing features and a lot of competing priorities, and you need to make the priority, and you need to make that priority list for the engineers so they know what's the highest priority and what's the lowest priority, so that they're not being pulled in many different directions by all the cross-functional teams. And the last thing, which I spoke about as well, is analyzing data at Google scale. So at Google, we have a lot of data to understand user behavior, to understand what they want to do, like what features do they like, what do they not like, and so use that behavior to your advantage to build the right product for the user. And so when we think through how to do a product design, so again, user first, so the customers come first, and then think about the customers, think about the users, and then think about their needs. What do they want? What are their pain points? And then think about, how could we answer these needs? So at Google, we sometimes do these brainstorming experiments called How Might We? And we just think through, okay, here we first brainstorm a bunch of problems that users have that are in the domain, like let's say in the payments domain. And then you think through, okay, how might we make it easier to pay a friend? How might we make it easier to pay a shopkeeper? How might we make it easier to pay online? And then that frames your thinking for the features, the actual features that you want to build. So you'll brainstorm a bunch of different ideas, and then you'll say, okay, we think this is a good feature that will solve a problem for the user. So you'll build that feature, you'll build it with the engineering and design team, and then you'll launch that feature. But your job as a product manager is not done when the feature is out the door. You also need to measure the success of that feature. So you need to make sure you have accurate data analytics on how people are using that feature, how many people, are they being retained, are they dropping off, and keep improving on the success and improving on the funnel of those users. And so this is another way to think about it, about what does a product manager do at different steps in the process. So sometimes in the beginning, there's the definition process where you don't even know what the product is, you don't even know what you're building. And you as a product manager, in that case, you're mostly a visionary. You're the one saying, this is what we need to build. And you're advocating for it. So you're also a spokesperson. You're getting buy-in from leadership. You're getting buy-in from the engineering teams. You're getting buy-in from the different teams that, hey guys, we should build this. It would be really awesome. And then you're also partly a resource manager in that you're saying that, and I think we need 5 engineers for this, and we can take those engineers off these other lower priority projects. So that's in the first phase, which in my opinion is the most exciting phase, because you're building something new from scratch. So you are like the pioneer. At Google, we often say that the product manager is the CEO of their little product. And so that's the most exciting phase. And now enters the development phase. So when the engineers are actually writing the code and we're doing sprints and we've defined the MVP. In that case, you're mostly a project manager. So you're defining, okay, are things getting done on time? Do we have enough resources? So you're a resource manager, you're making sure that we have enough people to get it done on time. You're coordinating with many different teams. So you're making sure that marketing and legal, et cetera, know what's happening. And then at launch time, it's a lot more coordination and just making sure all of the checks are crossed before you launch. So you need to make sure you're meeting all the privacy requirements, all the GDPR requirements, making sure that every single cross-functional stakeholder is aware that, by the way, this is getting out the door on this date. Everyone needs to be aligned, and we need to make sure we've covered all our bases. And then after launch is the maintenance phase, and that's when you start becoming the business analyst. So basically, you see that the feature is out there, you see how people are using it, and you think about how you can actually grow that business. So then you become a bit more of a visionary as well, saying, okay, we launched this product, but we can make it better if we add this feature and that feature and that feature, and keep thinking about ways to grow business and ways to grow the usage of your product. And so one practice that we have at Google is something called a product requirement document. So in this document, it contains information about many aspects of the product. So like a market analysis, the users of the product, and what technology we're building it on. So it often, so the way the document is structured is it often starts with a vision, and then like, this is what we want to achieve, like make payments seamless. And then you think through the users, these are the users, and then these are their use cases. Like these are the things that we want them to do using our product. Then you think through the design of the product and what features are needed. And then also the roadmap, because you have something that is the MVP, but also, and like, okay, this will get out the door in 6 months. But after the MVP, we want to keep improving on it. And this is like, we want to keep adding features and make it better and better. And also, what metrics are you going to track? So I'll talk a bit through the product requirement documents. So this happens especially with first-time product managers, is that they spend so much time building the perfect PRD, thinking about every single edge case. So obviously you have the main uses of a product, but you have edge cases like, oh, what if someone enters in the wrong number? What if someone tries to pay themselves? And then you build it out. And then this often happens at Google because everyone is so busy and working so much. They don't have time to look at your document. In fact, one of the first pieces of advice I got at Google is that no one is going to read your doc. What do you do then? So there's a few different ways to think through the product requirement document or building out a new product. So first is if it's a known environment. So if you've built a similar feature in the past, and this is just an incremental piece on top of it, in that case, we don't need to spend a lot of time writing a PRD from scratch, copy pasting, etc. Instead, what we can just do is create an amendment to the existing PRD saying, okay, this is something that's already out the door, but I think it would do way better if we added this feature on top of it. So don't do it on your own. So you might think, hey, this is a great idea, let me just think this through, etc. But having someone else to bounce ideas off of will make you more effective in the long run. And then you and your peer, so the peer can be a product manager, someone else who's used to thinking this way. Then you need to go and talk to the engineers and the UX designers, as well as the leads, to make sure that they're supportive of your new idea. Like you might think it's really cool, but they might not. So often, this is more of a soft thing. So if I wanted to launch something, I would often grab coffees with people and, just try to make them say that, hey, I think this is a pain point. First, understand if they think it's a pain point. If they don't think it's a pain point, why not? Or if they don't think it's a pain point, but they think it's a low priority, why do I think it's a high priority? So just like in a coffee chat, I would try to convince them why this is a real pain point, and if we launch this, we will have this many more users, etc. So and then the whole data analysis piece comes in. But basically, Google is a big company, and you have to get buy-in for your new feature. And once you do get that buy-in, you can start planning with all the cross-functional teams, making sure that you have prioritized your feature accordingly. Where does it sit in the backlog of all of the things that the engineering team needs to do? What is the MVP? And also, what are the potential roadblocks so you can predict them and then kind of circumvent them early on? Because if you don't predict those early on, they're going to become a problem later on and then delay your timeline. And also, once you've started walking down a path, it's harder to get off that path and move backwards. So the earlier on you can deal with roadblocks, the better. And then you can start your project. So now what if there's something that's a new idea, so not an incremental feature? How should you go about it at Google? Sometimes, so at Google, what we do is we do yearly planning. So we often do planning of what we want to achieve by 2020. And then we also do quarterly planning. So of all of the 2020 goals, which ones are we doing in Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4? We call this process the OKRs, the objectives and key resolutions. But sometimes you might have a new idea in the middle of the year. You see like, oh, this competitor is doing something like this. That could be really cool. Or, you learn that, users are using your product in a unique way and you really want to lean into that. So what do you do then? Again, the first thing is to validate that your idea is actually a good idea and not just something in your head. So you would talk to a few folks in the hallway, and the MK is the micro kitchen. So that's where Googlers go to get snacks. And that's also a very social space. And the joke at Google is you're never more than 200 meters away from food at any given time. But anyway, I digress. The main point is to get validation that your idea is actually a good idea, and also let people poke holes in your idea, because it's way better for a casual hallway conversation to find issues with your project than for like a leader, like a VP, to find issues with your project. And then the important thing here is that you create a one pager. You limit yourself to just one page of what you want. And so the reason is you could spend a long time writing out all the details about your project and your cool new idea. But if it falls flat, or if it doesn't have the right buy-in, then you just wasted all of that time. So that's why we limit to just one page. And so like, it's better to fail early and fail often. And so basically you have a one pager, and then you can share it with a bunch of trusted people, get feedback. And it's better to realize after just writing one page, when you're thinking through it yourself, you're like, wait a second, a lot of these things don't make sense. Or when you share those one pages with people early on, you can get feedback and they can say, nope, that's a really bad idea, or it's bad for these reasons. And then you keep pivoting your idea, or you can actually just drop your idea. Like, it's not a bad thing at Google to be running with a project and then realize, hey, actually, this is probably not going to work out, and then just drop it. And then once you've iterated and your one page is in a form where a lot of people are actually supporting your idea, and you've covered all the loopholes, or you've pivoted enough that it's something that other people think is valuable, then is when you should talk to your engineers and talk to your leads to make sure that they're supportive of the idea as well. And then now you have a one pager, but now you need to start writing your PRD, which is the product requirements document. So you have to be concise, be very visual. So it's almost better to sometimes have mocks and sketches than to write, oh, user will press a button will pop up and do this, that button will say this, etc. You can write out a whole paragraph of that, or you can just put one screen on there. So one skill that I had to pick up at Google, which I didn't know before, was using Sketch and using Figma to make mocks, just to convey my idea, because it's just a way simpler way. And in fact, sometimes if it was very early stages, I would just draw something on a whiteboard or on a piece of paper and take a picture of it and put that in my one pager, just because something visual is just way easier to parse. At Google, we often have PRD templates that you could reuse. And most importantly is that from the one pager, it might have just been your idea, but for the PRD, you need to make sure that your TL, which is your technical lead, your engineering lead, and your UX designer are on board, because they're there to help you think through the things that, you're kind of a jack of all trades, but they're the TL, they're the engineering expert or the UX expert, and keep it short. So I think the best state for the PRD to be in is when it's a draft. So where the major ideas are fleshed out, but it's not like completely perfect. It's not like every single tiny edge case has been fleshed out. And other people can then comment, leave feedback, help you think through some of these cases a bit more. And then at Google, we have something called a program review. So for every major project that we're doing, we have a bunch of leads who are reviewing it on either like a weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly basis, depending on the scope of the project. And basically, so we would go and inform the senior leaders that, hey, we've thought through this, we got all the right buy-in, and we think it's a really great feature. Can we launch this? So these two examples were in case you have an idea, whether it's an incremental idea or a new idea. But a product manager's role also kicks in when there are unforeseen issues in a project. So sometimes you start a project and it's been going super well, but then you find new information that hasn't been covered in the PRD and it's possibly derailing your whole project. What you should do is, first of all, don't wait for a weekly meeting. At Google, we have a bunch of weekly meetings, but go and discuss it at your next stand-up. So we often have daily stand-ups with the engineering team. Basically, as soon as you find something that might derail your project, huddle up with people and try to figure out a solution for it. Don't just keep it hidden or think, oh, I'll just solve it myself. Like, you need to solve it with people because it threatens the whole project. And then again, you would write a one-pager, say, okay, this is the bigger issue that we've seen, but this is something quick that we could do to unblock UX and engineering. So the worst thing that could happen is if the engineering team needs to stop coding, because your goal is that the engineering team is always coding just to maximize efficiency of the engineers. So that your first priority, once you find a problem, is, okay, what is something we can do immediately so that the engineering and UX team is not blocked? So you could say, okay, let's pivot and focus on this other part of the project while we solve the problem with this part of the project. Or let's have them build this short-term solution while we think through what a long-term solution is. So that's how we unblock those the team. And then once your whole team is unblocked, you can then update the PRD based on the one-pager. So basically say, here, so this is the PRD that you had written earlier, but now you add on, given this new unforeseen issue, you add on and update all the sections and then send an email to the team. And when we say the team, we meant the whole team. There's been so many situations with me where myself and the engineers make a decision, but we haven't conveyed it to marketing, to legal, or to all the other cross-functional teams. And then that only comes out later. And then that really ruins the efficiency between the teams, because maybe marketing is thinking of your product as one particular thing, but now you've changed it. So you need to make sure that you over communicate any changes. Now I'll kind of talk through an important thing that we have at Google, shipping versus landing. So shipping is just a Silicon Valley way to say launching something. In the way we think about it, good product managers launch features, whereas great product managers land features. What does that mean? Launching is just like, cool, we built an app, it's out the door. Now, is that still a success if no one uses your app? Nope. So the way we think about product management is, what is your feature has landed? So that means, are people using it every day? Is it getting good reviews? Are people coming back? Are people referring it to their friends? Is it growing? Just getting something out the door is not enough. And so this is a joke of, how your product requirement document describes something versus what it actually looks like when it's shipped. First of all, when you land something, like when I've launched an app, I wasn't that excited. I was like, oh, cool, it's an app and it's out there. But what's something that you would be excited to show your mom or show your family that, look, this is something cool that I've built and this many people are using it and it's helping them in this way and it's solving these problems. So make sure it's and the reason, like, product managers are kind of never satisfied. They want to keep improving on the product. And then you also want to keep dogfooding and monitoring your product and making sure that every single detail is covered. And you're the one, you own the product, you're the CEO, you're going to find all the tiny issues and keep fixing them, because it's about product excellence. And then keep also experimenting, collecting feedback, and iterating. Also, a hard lesson that I had to learn, because I'm not a super aesthetic person, but aesthetics do matter. Just having the same information presented in a different way in a product can increase usage so much. At Google, we also focus a lot on execution. So like I mentioned earlier, vision is my favorite part of being a PM, but vision without any execution is just a hallucination. You need to be the big visionary thinker, the Steve Jobs, but you also need to be the hard worker, working bee who thinks through all the details. And so at Google, we have two different styles of basically engaging or doing work, the waterfall or the Scrum Agile model. So waterfall, and I think it might be surprising to some of you on the call, but actually Google does use waterfall for some projects that are done in a linear fashion. So when I was on Chrome OS, hardware was very linear. So you had to make sure all of the pieces were working to get to the first stage, then make sure all the pieces were working to get to the second stage. And you could never go back to a prior phase. So once that stage was locked, it's locked because you cannot change hardware. You cannot change the vendors that you're ordering from. If you've ordered 100,000 units, you can't unorder them. But most of the projects, especially the software-based, so the app-based or website-based projects are scrums. So basically you do weekly sprints. You iterate often and quickly, like basically there's 1 week where UX is iterating, and then they hand over to the engineers, then the engineers are working on it, and PMs are working and to unblock them. And so basically, if I think of the PM needs to define something. So for the engineers, so okay, engineers, please start coding. Here's a rough design that here's a stick person. And then UX will go in and fill in all the details, and that the engineers can just do later. So in summary, and thank you for hearing my talk for so long, but basically product managers provide clarity. You want to skate to where the puck is going, not where it has been. So product managers need to look to the future, whereas other people, other roles might be focusing more on their day-to-day and on their daily tasks. Product managers need to think about the future. And also just do whatever it takes. So in my role as a product manager, I've done all the cool stuff of, oh, cool, presenting to the VP or doing big talks, but I've also done a lot of the grunt work. Like I've done manual data entry. I've done, writing up emails for engineers, like just any grunt work that needs to be done, just anything you need to do to get your product out the door. And also a very important job is making sure that, your engineers and your whole team is working so hard. You need to champion it and make sure that people across Google know what you're doing. But at the same time, I think product managers with egos don't often survive long at Google, because product managers, just as a role, your effectiveness of your job is by how well people like you. Do the engineers like you? Do the cross-functional people like you? Will they do what you want them to do? Because you're kind of influencing without authority. You're not the boss of these people. You're just helping build the product. And so being humble is very key to have good relationships. And so another piece of having good relationships is your whole job is making others succeed. So like, sometimes there's a joke at Google that, hey, the engineers are doing all the real work and you're just kind of, enabling things along the way. And so in that same vein, make sure that people are getting credit, because often you as a product manager are viewed as the leader, but you know who's doing a lot of the work, and make sure that they're also bucked up. And like I mentioned, you are often fixing features yourself, or often I'm like writing scripts myself, or just, doing minor changes in the code even. And you have to be super, super detail oriented. And last but not least is don't forget to be an optimist, because often, timelines get delayed or projects get derailed, projects get canceled. PMs have to be a motivation for that whole team to, don't worry, we're going to get through this. It might affect the timeline, it might affect this, but keep the morale up. So in summary, this is what makes a good product manager. I think I've spoken through all of this. And yeah, thank you for coming to the talk, and let me know if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Hannia, for coming over and sharing wonderful insights with us. I hope people who have joined us both on Zoom and social media, they must have learned a lot. And I hope that you must have inspired a few people to join product management as a career as well. We're absolutely bombarded with questions, so we'll just get on with it. Just a second. Okay, so the first question is, to what extent do you think the product management process at Google applied to a smaller company, say a startup or a small mid-sized services company?
Yeah, I think it's often a joke we think through about how startups don't have product managers in the beginning, but the point is not that there shouldn't be a product manager role. It's just that everyone should be a product manager at that stage. Everyone should be thinking of the details, thinking user first, working cross-functionally, trying to solve all the small problems. So I think at a startup, you make sure everyone thinks that they are the product manager. At a medium-sized company, at some point, it just becomes more effective to have one person who's thinking through all the details. If it's always the CEO and you're a 50-person company, then the CEO is going to be blocking decisions for the rest of the people. So then you need to start having leaders for each of the products. Sorry, I cannot hear you. I think you're muted.
So the second question is, how do we test our product that is service oriented? What to consider while making a product? So not product, but service.
Okay, service oriented. I'm not sure what they mean by service.
Any app or something?
Okay. So one thing that I did, or that we do at Google, is that we often make mocks or prototypes. So like I said, either a whiteboard design, but just something a bit more like, let's make it like look like a real app, but it's just a prototype, and it's not even no code. You can even just take pictures of it. And so what we did, for example, was we printed out a bunch of pictures of the app, and we went and sat in a cafe and just asked people, hey, can you just test this out? Okay, on this screen, what would you press? And then, okay, it takes you to this screen, and we're literally just showing them on paper. And then we just see how they react, and then we ask them questions afterwards, and then they say, oh, like I didn't really like this part or didn't like that part. But I think the basic summary is that get it in front of the users as soon as possible. And like, even if it's something very rough, just keep getting feedback on it early on.
Okay, so another question is, from idea to product development, how much time percentage is spent in the design effort? So from thing to sprint, how much time is spent? Yeah.
That often depends on the urgency. So like, let's say if you have something that urgently needs to launch, let's say because a competitor has launched something similar, or it's a crisis like the Corona crisis, so Google has been launching some features, then you spend way less time on it. But often if it's like something that's your pet project or something that you want to launch, you can spend a lot more time ideating with yourself and then getting buy-in from people, and then going through the design phase. But I would say that often when we think through like, our yearly planning, we spend 1 week maybe doing the brainstorming, and then 1 to 2 weeks doing a lot of the like sprints of like the mocks and what features we want to build.
All right, we have Osama with us, and he wants to ask you about your failure stories. So can you share one of your failure stories, and how did you overcome that failure?
Ooh, okay. There's a lot of them, so I'm just trying to think through. I think so. Basically, when I was working on the Google Maps data analysis team, we spent a lot of time building a dashboard. And then when we actually finally showed it to people, they were like, oh, this is cool. But then they would use it once and then never use it again. So that was a bit disappointing for the engineering team and for the data analysts who I was working with, because we had spent months on this project and people only used it once. And I think that was a good lesson for me, because I was the product manager of this project, and I was advocating, hey, we should build this. I think it'd be awesome. But then I realized that only I had thought it was awesome, and I hadn't spoken to the actual customers. So in that case, the customers were the other product managers at Google. And kind of we had this disconnect where, because I thought that Google's a data-driven company, I thought any data I present to them, or if I make data easier to parse, people will use it. But that's not actually the case. I didn't actually go and ask the product managers what are their problems. And the problem was that they didn't even have time to look at the data. And even if they did have time, often decisions were not made in a data-driven way. And so our dashboard was actually useless to them. And so it was like a sad moment, but it was, what I learned from it was that, the earlier on that you get your stuff in front of people and get feedback, then the better. And then it's not about your time, but I think the thing I felt worse about was that, I wasted the engineers' times, and then they were disappointed.
Okay, so we have Arshan with us, and his question is, within product management, how do you select the second priority after customers or users? The first priority is customer, but what is the second priority?
It's really funny. I think at Google, most Googlers would say it's user first, user only. That's the only thing that matters. But I think if you think about it practically, it's user first. But for most companies, you have to think user first and then revenue. Because often Google is lucky enough to be a product where as long as we're getting more people using it, we're getting more revenue because our revenue is all based on ads. But not every product is like that. So I would say second is revenue.
Okay, and we have Gaurav with us, and he's asking, when do you consider your PRD is done? Often when your stakeholders don't read the details, how do you convince them of their importance and involvement needed to make a product successful?
Okay, hi Gaurav. So I think, first of all, I think PRDs are never done. I think PRDs are a living document that you need to keep updating constantly. And also, like, as soon as you write them, they're out of date, because, you know, as soon as you have one more conversation, there's something that you have to, you know, put back into the PRD. So at least I found that I had to be smart about, let's make sure the high level in the PRD is all correct, but sometimes the details are only in the code, and that's okay, because, you know, you have many things to do. Also, sorry, could you repeat the second part of the question?
Yes, so often when your stakeholders don't read the details, how do you convince them of their importance and involvement needed to make a product successful?
Yeah, so I think this is the first advice I got, is that no one is going to read your doc. So often what I think is, when you write a PRD, that's for yourself to think through all of the pieces, the vision, the use cases, the details, the edge cases. And then, but the thing is, you're not going to go and put that doc in front of someone and be like, sit and read it. Actually, that's just then fuel for you, because now that you have the structured thinking in your head, what you actually need to do is go get coffee with all of those 5-10 people who are going to be working on your project and convince them, like, person to person. And nothing convinces someone more than like a person to person interaction. People don't get convinced by reading documents. People are just by natural are not like, we're not overly logical people. We are people who do things based on relationships. So if they see you, they see how excited you are about the project, they see the problems that you're raising, and they'll just believe in that, okay, if you think it's such a big deal, then like they will buy into it as well.
Okay, so we have Sarah. She's the product manager of Mock Online, one of our startups. And she has a question. I'm product manager at Mock Online and have tried implementing a design thinking forward process in an emerging market context. Asif Baki has done great work with Poker Face when analyzing products. How do we make teams more introspective on what they are building? Do you have any suggestions on how to help engineers work through UX so that they can build smart? So we can build smart.
Yeah, I think you should make sure that people are involved in the brainstorming process from the beginning. So I remember even at Google, like, engineers are just like, oh, leave me alone. I just wanted code. I just want to, you know, build cool stuff. Like, don't involve me in all of this. But we would force them to come to the brainstorming session. So at this point, there's no mocks, there's no UX. It's just like, hey guys, here's a problem. How do we solve it? So we would force them to come there. And then we like, you know, a week later, 2 weeks later, we would have something on the actual UX, like wireframes. We would force them to come and give feedback. Then 2 weeks later, we'd have something a bit more fleshed out, like actual proper mocks. We'd force them to give feedback. And then basically, if you involve an engineer or the team, anyone in the team from that early on till the end of the process, then they feel also ownership, you know? And I think the framing of it is very important to say, hey, this is our project, this is our team, not like this is my project, but this is like us. And so they feel like, oh, I own this too, and I have a say. And also when they see that you give them, that you hear their feedback and you incorporate their feedback, then their feeling of ownership on the project increases quite a bit.
So we have another interesting question from Mohammed Mansoor, and it is, do you make any distinction between marketing-focused product manager or an execution-focused product manager? So what's the difference between them? A marketing-focused product manager and execution-focused product manager.
At Google, we don't make such a distinction. At Google, it's a bit odd compared to other companies, but at Google, every product manager must have a computer science degree. Like, we used to have the business product manager and then the like technical product manager, but we realized no, like every product manager needs to be able to speak to the engineers. So I think if you say marketing-based product manager, if those people are not speaking to the engineers, then Google wouldn't think of them as product managers.
And what about the research-focused product manager? So there are
Sorry?
three research focused product manager. So one is the marketing focused, then there is execution focused, research focused as well. So there are three distinctions, right? So how
Yeah,
would you differentiate between them?
I think probably the way that Google thinks about it is that you have one product manager. Depending on the stage of the project, if it's in the early stage, then they're doing research. If it's in the implementation stage, they're doing execution. And if it's about to launch, then they're doing market, and it has launched, then they're doing marketing. But Google would want one person to be thinking end to end about that whole piece, not have three different people.
Okay. So Hassan Shahid wants to know, can we have that white paper you're talking about? That would be great help.
Yes, I can send the link to it. Maybe I can send it to you guys and you can send it to them.
Sure. Okay, and another interesting question, I believe it's off topic, but I'll ask anyways. Can someone work in Google or any social media platform without any IT degree?
Yes, for sure. So, I mean, I'm on the product manager and engineering side, so that's the technical side. And so we do have the technical roles. So Google is kind of divided into the technical piece and then the business and piece. So the technical piece is just people who have done IT, but there's a whole business side of people who are doing marketing and communications and also ad sales or ad negotiation, et cetera. So, and most of those people don't have IT degrees. So you can work at Google without an IT degree.
Okay, so diversity, now teams, they're diverse in the sense of background, race, color, religion. So how do a product manager actually deals with diversity?
So that's one thing I learned actually at the Next Billion Users team, the team that focuses on emerging markets. One thing that they do really well and that they encourage all of their product managers to do is to go on immersions. So we were building a product for Indonesia, and they sent us for a week in Indonesia where we went to the shop as an Indonesian would. We went and ate dinner. We spent kind of like a day in the life. We went and also spoke to people. Like we spoke to gamers in Indonesia. We spoke to young women who are running their businesses, and we had an interview with them. And so the whole point was that you empathize with the user and put yourselves in their shoes and live with their life, and also hear directly from them. Because I might say that, oh, maybe in Indonesia, women have this and this problem, but it's not until I go and talk to that woman that I think that they had this and this problem. So that helped us think through some of our payments use cases in Indonesia. Obviously, doing a trip is very expensive, but another thing that people at Google do is they constantly run surveys. So if I'm like, oh, I think this is a problem for users, what I can do very easily is just send a survey out to 1,000 people about hey, do you ever use this app to pay your friend? If so, have you ever have you had this issue? Maybe I'll think of some issue, have you had this issue? And then I just get the data back. And then and that's so you can send surveys out to random people, but you can also send specific surveys to the people who are using your product. So a lot of products at Google have a pop-up survey that you can just answer. So the only way is to put yourself in the shoes of the users and just ask them and keep getting feedback from them directly. A lot of really great product managers I know at Google are constantly reading the reviews of the apps that they've launched. Because they know that over there is where people are posting all the angry things as well.
Okay, so one last question. So in today's age, right, and all the COVID-19 situation going on, so how can startups implement successful product management within their startups? They have a lot to think about. There is, startups are dying, VCs are pulling out. So what is your advice to startups working in the situation?
Yeah, first of all, I'm really sorry because it's a very tough position to be in, and it's unfortunately the world over this is happening. I think now more than ever is the time for startups to focus on their core, focus what is the simplest thing, MVP, that we can do to get our product out the door that is actually genuinely useful to people, and get that data that to prove that it's useful, that people like it, that people are coming back. You make sure you have that data on hand. And so because there's obviously hundreds of startups that are really cool ideas. What can set you apart is that here's also proof that people actually use this. And then I think as a product manager, working digitally is a bit harder because a lot of your work is about relationships with people. But I know at least all the product managers at Google these days are still like, they have their video calls every day, but then they also have just casual video calls, which are just a 10-15 minute coffee video call, just to keep that relationship up with others.
Thank you so much. That's a great advice. And with this advice, we'd like to end today's session. Thank you so much for coming in once again. It was a great session, great learning experience for us as well. And I hope the people who've joined us both on Zoom and social media, they must have learned a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thanks to everyone who tuned in.
Love us.